What if I told you that the downfall of every great civilization, from the Babylonians to the Romans to the British Empire, wasn't caused by war or famine or even corruption, but by sexual freedom? I know, that sounds outrageous. But stay with me, because buried in the dusty archives of forgotten scholarship is a study so controversial, so politically incorrect, that it has been effectively erased from modern education. The man behind it? A British anthropologist named J.D. Unwin. His work may hold the most important warning for the modern West, one we are ignoring at our peril. Unwin wasn't a moral crusader. He wasn't a priest. He was a cold, clinical academic. In the early 20th century, he set out to study 86 different human civilizations and tribes, spanning thousands of years. His goal was not to preach, but to observe. He wanted to know what causes societies to rise and what causes them to collapse. The results shocked even him. Across cultures, across geography, across time, the same pattern repeated. Societies that practiced strict sexual restraint, particularly when it came to female chastity and premarital abstinence, consistently produced explosions of creativity, strength, and expansion. But when those same societies relaxed their sexual morals, allowing for more freedom, more promiscuity, and less restraint, they entered an inevitable decline. Always. No exceptions. Think about that for a second. No exceptions. Not one. The implications are staggering, because if Unwin was right, then what we call sexual liberation today, something celebrated as progress, might actually be a ticking time bomb for civilization itself. Now, you might be asking, why would sexuality determine the strength of a society? It sounds absurd, almost too simple, but that's the beauty of Unwin's work. It reveals how the most primal human urges shape not just families, but the destiny of nations. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Let me give you an example. The Roman Empire didn't collapse because of the barbarians alone. By the time the Goths were at the gates, Rome had already rotted from within. The old Roman virtues, discipline, family loyalty, self-restraint, had given way to decadence, indulgence, and rampant sexual license. Their downfall wasn't just military, it was moral, psychological, and civilizational. And here's the part that should make every modern man sit up straight. Unwin concluded that once a society embraced full sexual freedom, decline set in within just 3 generations. That's roughly 100 years. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the sexual revolution of the 1960s marked the West's embrace of total liberation, where does that leave us today? We are now living in Unwin's predicted 3rd generation. This isn't a religious sermon. It's not about whether you or I think people should be sexually free. This is about cold historical reality. Patterns, data, outcomes. And if history is any guide, then we are heading straight toward collapse, whether we like it or not. In this video, I'm going to walk you through Unwin's study in detail, what he found, why it matters, and most importantly, what it means for you as a man trying to make sense of a chaotic modern world. Because once you understand this forgotten law of civilization, you'll never look at modern relationships or society the same way again. Most people today have never heard of J.D. Unwin. That's not an accident. His work is deeply inconvenient for modern ideology. But before we dive into his controversial conclusions, let's look at how he arrived at them. Because this wasn't some opinionated rant. This was systematic research. Unwin spent 7 years studying 86 societies and civilizations, ranging from ancient Mesopotamia to Greece and Rome to primitive tribes in Africa and Polynesia. In his landmark 1934 book, Sex and Culture, J.D. Unwin compiled this research, laying out a theory so controversial it has been buried from mainstream education ever since. He wasn't cherry-picking. He deliberately chose cultures separated by vast differences in geography, religion, race, and politics. And yet, despite all these differences, the same law seemed to govern their rise and fall. Here's the core of his findings. 1. Sexual restraint creates energy. In every society, when people, especially women, were expected to remain sexually chaste before marriage, and when monogamy was enforced after marriage, the society generated enormous social energy. This energy expressed itself in exploration, innovation, military strength, and cultural achievement. 2. Sexual freedom drains energy. Once sexual restraints were loosened, the social energy that built great civilizations dissipated. People became more focused on pleasure than progress, on indulgence rather than duty. Families weakened, birth rates dropped, and the collective willpower of the society faded. 3. The pattern was universal. Not one culture in Unwin's study escaped this law. Sexual liberation was always followed by civilizational decline. Always. Unwin classified societies into 3 main categories based on sexual norms: absolute monogamy, strict premarital chastity, and lifelong fidelity; modified monogamy, some loosening of restrictions, but still within marriage; irregular or promiscuous societies, little to no restraint, high levels of sexual freedom. The pattern was consistent. The stricter the sexual code, the more powerful and innovative the society became. The looser the code, the weaker and more stagnant it grew. Here's where it gets chilling. Unwin found that societies that achieved absolute monogamy reached their highest levels of creativity and expansion within 3 generations. But when they abandoned chastity and monogamy, decline followed, also within 3 generations. Now, ask yourself, does that sound familiar? The 1960s marked the West's sexual revolution: free love, contraception, the collapse of traditional moral codes. By Unwin's timeline, that puts us today in the 3rd generation since liberation, exactly the point when decline should be most visible. And what do we see? Falling birth rates, collapsing marriage rates, skyrocketing mental illness, rising nihilism among men, and an aimless culture obsessed with pleasure but devoid of purpose. Even if you reject morality as the basis of this argument, even if you say, "I don't care about religion, I don't care about tradition," you can't ignore outcomes. That's what Unwin measured. He didn't moralize. He observed. And what he found is that sexual freedom doesn't liberate societies. It sedates them. It robs men of ambition, robs women of stability, and robs civilizations of the energy needed to survive in a competitive world. And that's why this study has been buried. Because if people took it seriously, the entire narrative of progress would collapse. In the next section, we're going to explore why sexual restraint generates power in the first place. Why would a man's private choices, or a woman's, determine whether their civilization builds pyramids, conquers continents, or collapses into dust? The answer goes deep into human psychology, evolution, and the very nature of desire. If Unwin's findings are true, and the evidence is overwhelming, then the next question is obvious. Why? Why would restraining sexual freedom create explosive energy for a civilization while indulgence drains it? The answer lies in human psychology, biology, and the brutal realities of evolution. Let's start with something every man instinctively knows. Desire is a double-edged sword. Sexual energy is one of the most powerful forces in human existence. It can drive men to build empires or to waste their lives chasing fleeting pleasure. History is full of both examples. Think about it. The young man who cannot easily satisfy his urges is forced to channel his energy elsewhere. He must prove himself, work hard, develop discipline, gain resources, and earn status to win the approval of women and the respect of his peers. That pressure, the necessity of restraint, turns raw lust into ambition. It fuels art, science, conquest, and legacy. On the other hand, when sexual gratification is cheap and easily available, that pressure disappears. The fire of ambition burns out. Why climb the mountain if you can get the reward at the bottom of the valley? Why build a monument, a business, or a legacy if pleasure is just one swipe away on a dating app, or worse, on a porn site? This is why Unwin described sexual restraint as the foundation of social energy. It is not repression, it is transmutation. It takes the most primal human drive and redirects it toward higher goals. Every man who has ever lifted weights instead of scrolling TikTok or started a business instead of chasing casual hookups understands this on a personal level. But there's another layer: women. In societies where women reserve sex for committed, high-quality men, the standards of male excellence rise. Men compete, innovate, and discipline themselves to meet those standards. But in societies where sex is freely available, standards collapse, men stop striving, and mediocrity becomes the norm. Evolution doesn't care about equality, it rewards survival. And societies with disciplined, ambitious men and stable families consistently outcompete those where indulgence dominates. That's why Unwin's pattern holds universally across cultures and centuries. Now let's connect this to today. Look around at modern men. We live in the most sexually liberated age in history, and yet men are more depressed, anxious, and purposeless than ever. Pornography hijacks our brains, casual sex erodes the meaning of relationships, and marriage is seen as a trap rather than a foundation. The very energy that once built civilizations has been siphoned off into short-term indulgence. And here's the bitter truth: restraint isn't just about morality, it's about survival. It's about whether men have the discipline to channel their energy into building something greater than themselves, or whether they dissipate it in endless cycles of indulgence and regret. That's why Unwin's research hits so hard. It reveals that the battle over sexual morality isn't just a private matter, it's the silent engine of history. Civilizations rise when men master themselves. They fall when men surrender to pleasure. In the next section, we're going to apply this to history directly. We'll examine real civilizations, Rome, Greece, Mesopotamia, and show how sexual freedom set them on fire, not with greatness, but with destruction. J.D. Unwin's study wasn't just theory, it was history written in blood, stone, and ashes. Civilizations didn't collapse because of mystery or fate. They collapsed because they abandoned restraint, lost their willpower, and surrendered to indulgence. Take Rome. Everyone knows Rome fell to barbarian invasions. But here's the truth. By the time the barbarians arrived, Rome had already committed suicide. The early Romans were known for strict discipline in family, in marriage, in military life. They built roads, aqueducts, and an empire that stretched across the known world. Their energy was unmatched, but then came wealth, decadence, and freedom. The old Roman virtues, gravitas, duty, fidelity, were replaced by hedonism. Brothels flourished, divorce became common, and elite women flaunted their affairs openly. Sexual indulgence was celebrated as sophistication. And what followed? Declining birth rates, weakening armies, political corruption, and a society too soft to defend itself. By the time the Goths entered the gates, Rome wasn't conquered, it was already hollow. Or look at classical Greece. Athens once gave the world philosophy, democracy, and art. But when the Athenian elite embraced unrestrained indulgence, mistresses, boy toys, and endless feasts, their political unity fractured. Sparta, more disciplined, eventually crushed Athens. Even the philosophers noticed the decay. Plato warned that too much freedom, especially sexual freedom, would destroy democracy. He was right. The same pattern shows up everywhere. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, collapsed as sexual norms loosened and fertility rates dropped. The Persian Empire, once fierce and expansive, decayed under luxury and indulgence. Even Victorian England, which Unwin studied closely, saw its global dominance peak under strict sexual codes and decline as those codes loosened. Now here's the controversial part. Unwin's research suggests that sexual liberation is not progress. It is civilizational suicide, and yet today we celebrate it as the highest form of freedom. We glorify sex positivity, promote hookup culture, and call chastity oppressive. But history whispers the opposite. Unrestrained indulgence is the death knell of nations. Ask yourself, why are Western nations today experiencing collapsing birth rates, skyrocketing loneliness, and declining military recruitment? Why are young men sedated by porn, casual sex, and OnlyFans, instead of building families, businesses, or legacies? Why is every metric of male strength, testosterone, marriage, fertility, plummeting at the exact same time sexual freedom is celebrated as a virtue? It's almost as if Unwin's forgotten law is unfolding before our eyes. And here's the thought that should make every man pause. Maybe the barbarians aren't at the gates yet, but maybe they don't have to be. Maybe civilizations today collapse not by invasion, but by implosion, by men and women too addicted to pleasure to defend or even continue their society. That's why Unwin's study is more dangerous than any political manifesto, because it implies that if the West doesn't rediscover restraint, our collapse is not just possible, it's inevitable. In the next section, we're going to confront the uncomfortable question: what does this mean for men today? If our civilization is in decline, what role should you play? As an individual, as a man, and as someone searching for truth in a collapsing world? Up until now, we've been talking about civilizations in the abstract: Rome, Athens, Mesopotamia. But let's strip away the history books and get brutally real. You are living inside this collapse right now. Look at the world around you. Look at your own life. Porn is free, sex is cheap, marriage is collapsing, and men are being told they're toxic for even wanting to lead. Meanwhile, women are being fed lies about empowerment that leave them overworked, underloved, and childless by 40. This isn't random, it's the exact script Unwin predicted. And here's the uncomfortable truth: most men are playing right into it. How many hours have you wasted draining your energy into a screen, clicking away at pixels while the fire of your ambition dies? How many times have you chased meaningless hookups that left you emptier, weaker, more distracted from building something lasting? How often have you numbed yourself with comfort, alcohol, weed, Netflix, because you no longer have a mission that demands your sacrifice? This is not just personal weakness, it's civilizational weakness. Because when enough men live like this, the society loses its backbone. The empire collapses, not because the enemy is strong, but because the men inside its walls have become soft, passive, and broken. Unwin wasn't just studying civilizations, he was studying you. He was proving that if you don't control your desires will control you. And if a generation of men surrenders to desire, that entire generation forfeits its future. Now here's where it gets controversial. Society tells you that freedom is about indulging every urge. Sleep around, watch porn, avoid marriage, stay independent. But history shows the opposite. True freedom comes from discipline, from mastery over the self, from channeling your energy into building, not consuming. This isn't a moral lecture, it's a survival warning, because while the West sinks into sexual chaos, other civilizations are watching. Some of them are stricter, hungrier, more disciplined, and when the balance shifts, when the West is too weak to defend itself, guess who wins? Not the nation with the most OnlyFans subscriptions, not the empire with the lowest testosterone, the disciplined, the restrained, the focused. So the question is, which side of history will you stand on? Will you be just another man seduced into mediocrity by a world that wants you weak, distracted, and dependent? Or will you be the outlier, the man who refuses to go down with the ship, who reclaims his energy, who builds something that lasts? Unwin's study doesn't just explain the past, it demands a decision from you here and now. Because if civilizations collapse in 3 generations and we are living in the 3rd, then the future is already being written in your choices. In the next section, we'll confront the hardest question of all. Is there any way back? Or has the West already sealed its fate? By now, you might be asking the obvious question, is there any hope? If Unwin was right, and every civilization that embraced sexual freedom collapsed within 3 generations, does that mean the West is already doomed? Here's the hard truth. Unwin himself didn't believe recovery was possible. In Sex and Culture, he documented case after case, showing that once sexual restraint is abandoned, no civilization in history has ever reversed course. None. The decline is always permanent. In his words, the history of these societies consists of a series of monotonous repetitions. Translation: once indulgence becomes normal, restraint never returns. That's the bleak reality. But let's push deeper. Is inevitability the same as destiny? Or do men, individuals, still have the power to carve out meaning in the ruins? History suggests that collapse is not the end. It's a reset. Rome collapsed, but out of its ashes came medieval Christendom. The Mongols devastated empires, but new nations rose from the rubble. Collapse doesn't mean nothing survives. It means something new emerges. The real question is, who builds the new world? Right now, Western men face a choice. You can go along with the tide of indulgence, comfort, and weakness, and be washed away when the reset comes. Or you can become part of the minority that chooses discipline, family, strength, and purpose, and position yourself as a builder in the aftermath. But here's the uncomfortable twist. Even if society at large is doomed, your personal fate isn't. Collapse is collective. Discipline is individual. You can't control the West's trajectory, but you can control whether you become one of the men who carry fire through the darkness. And this is where philosophy collides with psychology. Nietzsche once said that when God is dead, men must create their own values. That's exactly where we are. The old restraints are gone. Society won't enforce them anymore. That means men must enforce them on themselves or perish. Think about it. The Roman citizen of the 4th century couldn't stop the empire from collapsing, but he could decide whether to rot in decadence or to live with honor. And often it was the small pockets of disciplined men, monks, soldiers, thinkers, who carried civilization through the Dark Ages. So, is there a way back for the West? On a societal level, probably not. Unwin's pattern is merciless. But on a personal level, absolutely. You can build a fortress of meaning in your own life. You can become part of the minority that refuses to bow to indulgence. And if enough men do that, maybe, just maybe, the next civilization that rises from the ashes will be stronger. Which brings us to the final section, your role in the story. Because this isn't just about history or theory or some dead anthropologist's book. This is about you and the decision every man must make in an age of collapse. We've traveled from dusty archives to collapsing empires, from forgotten anthropology to the raw struggles of modern men. And the message is clear. Civilizations do not fall by accident. They fall when men trade discipline for indulgence, restraint for weakness, and meaning for comfort. J.D Unwin gave us a terrifying gift, the ability to see the pattern before it destroys us. His book, Sex and Culture, stands as one of the most explosive warnings ever written. a forgotten study that proves sexual freedom is not liberation but decay disguised as progress. And history screams the same warning. When men surrender to their desires, civilizations collapse, always, without exception. So the question is no longer about Rome, Athens, or Mesopotamia. The question is about you. What kind of man will you be in this collapsing age? Will you be the man who wastes his fire on porn, hookups, and distractions, another casualty in a society of addicts? Or will you be the man who reclaims his energy, disciplines his desires, and builds a life of strength and meaning, even as the empire burns around him? Understand this: you cannot stop the tide of history, but you can decide whether you are crushed by it or whether you ride above it. The collapse will come, whether in our lifetime or our children's. But when it does, the world will need men who are unbroken, men who still believe in duty, honor, family, and discipline, men who are willing to suffer for something greater than pleasure. And that is why this channel exists. To awaken men to truths the world would rather bury, to arm you with philosophy, psychology, and history so you can stand tall when others crumble. But awakening is not enough. Action must follow. So here's my challenge to you. Look at your life honestly. Where are you surrendering to indulgence? Where are you weak? And what would happen if you reclaimed that energy, redirected it, and lived as though your legacy, not just your comfort, mattered? The world is burning, but fire also purifies. Out of collapse comes rebirth. And the question that will echo through time is, were you one of the men who built in the ruins, or one of the men who got buried by them? If this message shook something in you, if it lit a spark or woke up a part of you that's been asleep, I want you to do two things. First, like this video and share it with a brother who needs to hear it. Don't keep this truth to yourself. Spread it. Awaken others. Second, subscribe to the channel and support this mission using the link in the description below. Every subscription, every share, every act of support strengthens a community of men who refuse to be broken by the age of collapse. Thanks for watching.